Hi, my name is Robert Johnson, and I serve as a location pastor here at Church of the Resurrection's Leawood Location. Welcome to Resurrection Stories, a podcast from Church of the Resurrection, through which we hope to expose our congregation and the greater Kansas City area to some of the amazing people who make up our church. We want you to know them better, and by hearing their stories of hope, transformation, and purpose, that you may be inspired as well. As you listen to today's conversation, I invite you to share this podcast with others. You can do that by going to core.org/stories. Now, let's welcome today's guest, who is Ally Drummond, one of the phenomenal young pastors here at Church of the Resurrection. You're going to hear today about her story of faith, her story of growing up in Resurrection, as well as how she has become such a courageous person in her faith walk and in her personal life. You're going to be blessed by her story. Let's get started. Ally, it's so great to have you with us. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. And you know I'm very excited about this because you and I are about to start a new project, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But before we get to that, tell folks what you do now and how long you've been at Resurrection.
Absolutely. So glad to be here and excited for what's ahead. I am currently serving as one of our connection and care pastors at our Leawood location. And starting in just a couple months' time, we will be moving towards launching a brand new location in Lee Summit. And we'll be working together, you and I, to start that new community of Resurrection in Lee Summit.
Absolutely. So how long have you been at Resurrection, and what do you like most about Resurrection?
So I've been at Resurrection my entire life.
Okay.
My family has actually been attending Resurrection longer than I've been alive. So really from day one, I have been a part of the Resurrection community.
So Pastor Adam baptized you?
Pastor Adam baptized me. Yes. Yeah. I was 3 months old, and we were still worshiping in what's now our Wesley Covenant Chapel. And Pastor Adam baptized me and have the pictures to show for it too. And but I think my favorite thing about Resurrection for me has really been the people and being able to get to know people that were friends with my grandparents who have now since passed, and being able, though, to hear their stories and how they raised their children next to my mom and her siblings, and just then those other connections like that. So it's the people.
So you've had a chance, really, as you've grown up in Resurrection, you've seen Resurrection kind of evolve. Of course, I'm sure that at the age of 12, you weren't making observations about the development of the church, but you've been here, and I'm sure you've seen significant changes. What's that been like for you? And have there been times when you felt unsettled? And have there been times when you were like, oh, wow, I can't believe my church is really going in this wonderful direction?
Right. I think the kind of first memories that pop into my head are the, wow, look at this. Look at what God's doing kind of memories. I remember this moment when we were building our Foundry Sanctuary, but when that sanctuary was being built, before there were any seats and before any of all the fixtures were placed, there was just cement everywhere and cement stairs. And I remember that as one of the first memories of, wow, look at this place. And it was a moment where they just let all the members come in and see the space and all the progress. And I'm pretty sure I was running up and down the cement stairs, which would then become like the balcony area with my siblings. And so I just had like this moment then of like one of those first moments of, wow, look at this. This is so cool that this is our church. And it just continued to always be a place where I felt welcomed and knew that there is a space for me. And I think that has done so much for my connection with God and my faith journey as a whole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just out of curiosity, and this is not a scripted question, but it's an easy question, I think. Do you remember when you became acutely aware that Resurrection is different, that this isn't just a church, it is a leading church, that we are leading our denomination? Do you remember when you became aware of that?
I remember when I realized the church was different. It was down the road, probably much later, when I realized that our church has the opportunity to be a force for good and leadership within our denomination and within the world as a whole in our community. But around that same time as that new sanctuary was being built, I think I was aging out of our kids ministry, but that they had opened up the new kids core ministry area, and there was all sorts of like bright wall colors, and there was like paper mache rocks and rivers that the kids could walk over to get to their classroom. And having grown up in the Methodist church, and then I also went to Catholic grade school and high school, and the Catholic parish that I went to grade school in looked incredibly different than the river rock, paper mache, bright colored adventure that it was to go to church at Resurrection. And so I think that's probably one of the first memories of, oh, this is different, and this is church.
Wow. That's beautiful. Wow.
It caught the attention of a kid for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were in Dallas at Perkins School of Theology, we didn't get a chance to mention that, which is an important part. You're a graduate of Perkins School of Theology, which is also what Pastor Adam and I proudly graduated from as well.
That's right.
When you were there, I'm sure you got a chance to experience other churches in the Dallas area. Did you do any processing of like, this is Resurrection, this is what I'm seeing here, and kind of comparing the experiences?
Yes, I did. And it's so interesting about Dallas. Both the United Methodist churches and all the other churches are just as everything's bigger in Texas, so are the churches. Yeah, so it's so interesting to be able to see, I grew up going to a big church, and yet that was like a normal sized church in Dallas in a lot of cases, not totally across the board, but in so many ways. And so that was really one of the first differences I noted of just like the landscape of church from where we are in the Kansas City area compared to the Dallas area. And then every church, just as anywhere, kind of has their personality and their DNA. And so it's so interesting to see and experience many more larger congregations and then learn about how they connect and stay connected with their congregants, how they invite people to grow in their faith, or, what one church might do looks different than the other. And I think that was really formative because it's not just something we consume, but it's something we're invited to participate in.
Absolutely. I think you and I, as we move towards the Lee Summit Project, I think that one of the really great things about our pairing is that you will have someone who grew up in Resurrection, who was born into Resurrection, who was baptized by Pastor Adam, and the wealth of insight that brings, and then someone who spent 28 years of ministry outside of Resurrection, who came to Resurrection after all those years, and has this perspective of what's going on in the rest of the church world, and bringing those two things together. I think it's going to create a great dynamic. We can't wait to work together. I think it's going to be really great, Ally.
Absolutely.
So let's get to your story. So tell me your life and however you would tell it. And you and I, of course, had to do this multiple times when we were going through the candidacy process, Board of Ordained Ministry, kind of telling your story. Tell us your story, and with emphasis on turning points for you, and kind of where you ended up to the place of even acknowledging a call to ministry.
Sure. So I grew up going to the Methodist church, going to Resurrection, and also going to the Catholic church. My dad's side is all Catholic and my mom's side is all Methodist. So the way that they, married the two, and when they were together, I'm glad this is recorded. So let me start over.
Yeah.
So my story begins with knowing that I grew up in the Methodist faith here at Resurrection, and then also in the Catholic tradition too. My dad's side is all Catholic and my mom's side is Methodist, and they always have married the two together and provided my siblings and I, especially as we were growing up, opportunities to be able to experience church in different forms. So went to Catholic grade school and high school while also attending church here at Resurrection too. And as I grew up, that became even more of a gift than I realized, because as I started to grow in my faith and have different experiences that have challenged my faith, I had the opportunity to see God and experience God from different perspectives, and how I engage with God and worshiped God on a Sunday look different from one space to another. And so that really was formative, because it was the opportunity to make decisions for my own and not just take what I had been given as the only way to have a relationship with God, but to grow in my faith in a way that felt right and, matched what I was believing and how I could grow and where God was among all of it. In high school, my sophomore year, my family my Gramps was really suddenly diagnosed with cancer, and it was a really rapid decline until he passed away in the spring of my sophomore year. And whenever I am telling my call to ministry story, it always kind of starts with that point. And it was a really liminal space that we found ourselves in, because in his final days, he was moved to Kansas City Hospice House. And while he was there, the first night, he was getting settled in, and his nurse, who I can't even remember her name or think of her face, but I just know that that was someone who in my life I just consider to be an angel. She sat with me and a couple of my siblings for a couple hours, and knowing a nurse, she's got things to do. And yet she somehow was able to sit there and answer any questions we had and be able to just be a source of comfort in such a stressful and hard time for us and for my entire family. And so that was such a hospitable space that it really nudged me towards considering volunteering there in my senior year, when I needed to have volunteer hours to graduate high school. So I went back and I volunteered at the hospice house, and it was a phenomenal experience, one that I really can't even imagine a junior and senior in high school deciding to go hang out at the hospice house for so many hours.
Exactly. Yes.
But it was such a moving experience that when I got to college, I realized, okay, what everyone says I should be doing the summer after freshman year is finding an internship, and you need internships, all the things that you hear just as this is what people do. And so when you're in college, so I figured it out, and I realized that Resurrection had summer internships, and one of them being in our congregational care, shadowing our pastors. And I saw in the description that it said hospital visits, end of life visits. And I'm like, okay, easy enough. I had some sort of experience like that when I volunteered for the hospice house. At this time, I thought I would go into social work or counseling. So I'm like, this is helpful enough to get me where I'm going. I had no intentions, no plans, not even on the radar to be a pastor. And yet that summer was so transformative for my faith.
Wow.
I had already begun that journey of discerning that over the past few years prior, discerning my own faith and, making more of those decisions of what my relationship with God will look like on my own terms. However, that summer just kind of opened wide the door towards really considering, okay, God, how will you use me? Where do you and I fit in together in terms of what life's going to look like? And so from there, I went back to college, and it was a very normal, typical roller coaster of a sophomore year of college experience. And then I went back and did a second year of that internship. And it just was so obvious that I didn't have to lay aside these parts of myself that energized me and I found passion in when I was in my sociology classes. But instead, that second internship year of getting the privilege to shadow our pastors, to walk with our congregants, to the ones who were gracious enough to let the 20-year-old kid, be in their room as their loved one was taking their final breaths. I just realized that in that space that God didn't ask me and has never asked me to abandon myself or who God's created me to be, but instead that somehow by God's grace, there's a way to make it all work and make it all fit together. And for me, that looks like then answering a call to pastoral ministry and being a pastor. And particularly, I'm ordained as a deacon in the United Methodist Church. So that means that I have the call to specifically and primarily then focus on ministries of compassion and justice. And it fit in. Once I realized that, it was like a light bulb aha moment, like, okay, God, I got it, that is all, it's all possible. So
That's a phenomenal story. I particularly like the fact about your story that your call to ministry was birthed out of a moment of caring. Mm-hmm. Because I think that one of the biggest problems with pastors, and this is not an attack on pastors, I think it has to do with, you can't be what you don't see, mm-hmm. and where you don't get mentored and nurtured into.
Right.
But there are so many pastors who don't understand that you can't, like, you're going to be miserable being a pastor if you don't care for, like love people, mm-hmm. and if you don't want to care for people. But you just said your identity, mm-hmm. your sense of self, your calling was birthed out of that time in hospice with your right. grandfather. Then you went back and did more of that work. That is phenomenal. That's mm-hmm. the heartbeat. That's why I think you're going to do so well in ministry, Ally. I walked into one of your classes. I was visiting when I made 6 months into mm-hmm. being at Leawood Location Pastor, visiting classes, grief groups, and I walked into a class, didn't know you were teaching, but walked in and it was like all these people, most of them older than I am, mm-hmm. even, who were struggling with grief. And I just remember being astonished at how you were in such command of that class. Mm-hmm. And there was one gentleman there who was clearly not doing well with his battle with grief, who kind of wanted to take over the class and the way you handled that. But the whole presentation, I just remember being astonished. That was my first time really getting to experience you separate from the other mm-hmm. care pastors. But I get it now. Mm-hmm. Like you were at home. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's great. So what do you miss? Let's talk about Lee's Summit just mm-hmm. for a second. Let's get a little bit of that in. What are you most excited about Lee's Summit?
I'm so excited that it will be the opportunity to bring home in a way, bringing resurrection to Lee's Summit.
Because you and your husband live in Lee's Summit.
Yeah, so my husband Josh and I live in Lee's Summit, and when folks have asked me over the past few years of how did you all end up there, because my family, I grew up in South Kansas City and closer to the Leawood location, and then all my siblings are further west in Kansas and further west in Kansas City too. And so then people have tried to piece together, like, you work at Leawood, why do you live in Lee's Summit? And I really didn't have a good answer other than, logistically, that was the spot where the house was that we ended up going with. But now I know, and it feels obvious now that, of course, God was working something out that we couldn't have even imagined. Like, of course God would. Wow. And so as we've just gotten more connected and familiar and comfortable with Lee's Summit, that's also just been the opportunity for God to really make this path forward, to know that this is where we really feel called to invest, and also to invest in the community and get more connected, and to be able to share our faith in a really incredible way. And so it's exciting that then Resurrection will have a location in Lee's Summit, and it'll be a place for people to, I pray, experience the same love and grace and connection and community with God and with God's people that I've experienced my whole life.
So I would say to folks, I don't know at what point people will see this. Some folks may see it within the next month, and some folks may not see it for a year mm-hmm. down the line. But whenever they see this, I hope they'll come over to see if you and I are living into our bright dreams for Lee's Summit. I'm sure we will be. One final thing, Ally, one observation I have about you that I think is connected to your story. I've described you to Dan and Adam and other people as being one of the most courageous leaders on our staff. Mm-hmm. And I've watched you. So and not to deal with age, we don't get caught up in age, but with our connection and care pastors, you're among you if not the youngest, among the youngest.
I think I'm the youngest pastor on our staff at this point in time.
That's right.
So yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
But when the connection and care pastors are together, it is very clear that you are the leader in the room. Where does that kind of courage? Have you processed where that kind of courage comes from to speak bold? I've seen you speak bold truth. I've seen you hold people accountable. I've seen you press against the pressure of just going along to get along, challenging assumptions. Have you processed where that comes from?
Yes, and at the same time.
And this is going to be so beautiful for young people who are watching this, who are struggling with courage.
Sure. Yeah, I think to some degrees, yes, I've processed that. And then I don't know that I, have the answer. I think part of it is just being so invested and believing in the work that we're called to do.
Wow.
And even just the work that I know God's called me to do.
Wow.
And caring so much about our church, or, if it's not the church, caring about the organization. I know that I had that when I was in a sorority in college, of just caring so much about the mission and purpose of the place where I'm rooted and investing in, that it's hard to imagine anything but being all in.
Yeah. Wow. Phenomenal answer. Ally, thank you so much. This was so fun. And I look forward to you and I having these kinds of conversations on our own with our spouses as we do the great work at Lee's Summit. But thank you so much. Powerful testimony. And folks, we look forward to having folks come over and help us out at Lee's Summit as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't wait. Thanks.